Hey, Steve Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. I've been looking forward to putting this video together because I really want to talk about the BC government's recent announcement this week on a home flipping tax. So they're introducing a tax that if you flip a home, whether it's your primary residence or it's an investment property, you're buying it personally as your corp, you're going to be taxed on it, okay? So if you flip it within the first year, it's a 20% tax on the profits. Now, keep in mind the legislation is not yet official, but it is coming. It's coming for January 1st, 2025, and it's going to be a retroactive tax. I'm going to get into all the implications for this because I think they're relatively significant, and then I'm going to get into sort of the politics of it and really the nuances of how this is going to impact the market, how it's not. I think it's incredibly important, and so I want to preface this by first and foremost saying I actually like David Eby. I've had him on the show. He's been on this show several times. I think he's brought in some good policies over the year, and there's some that I don't like. And this is one of those ones that I just don't like because it's politics. It's cheap politics. It's vote buying. We've got a BC election this year, so it kind of plays into the flavor of the week, which is let's point the fingers and blame somebody, but we're missing the bigger picture, okay? So I get the nuances that people are priced out of the housing market, right? Housing is incredibly expensive. It's unaffordable, particularly the millennial generation. They were lied to, right? They were told to go to school, get an education, get a good job, and you'll be able to buy a house, raise a family, and that hasn't come to fruition. So people are naturally upset. And so it's easy to then go and find a scapegoat and point a finger and say, we're going to get those bad guys. We're going to get them, and we're going to help you. And nobody ever looks inward and say, well, what is the real problem? And I have a view on housing as to how we got here. Why is it so expensive? Why is it so unaffordable? Is it really the house flippers? Because if you ask, a lot of people on Twitter or potentially here on YouTube, they'll tell you, yes, it's all speculation. Everybody's speculating. It's all the flippers. And I really want to unpack that because I think the reason why you've got extremely unaffordable housing in most of Canada, but particularly here in Vancouver, is you've had, 15 years of zero interest rate policy, which is artificially inflated asset prices. You then had cheap and easy mortgage credit growth, right? When people can borrow at 2% mortgages and lever that up 7 times your income, and you can borrow money and lever that up further through parents gifting you money, etc. You have created a credit bubble. We have in Canada a credit bubble. If you look at household debt to GDP, it's some of the highest in the G20. So you have a credit bubble which has been inflated through zero interest rate policy over the last 15 to 20 years. And meanwhile, you are, by doing this, you're debasing the currency, right? Do you ever ask yourself, not just housing, but why are things in general just really expensive today, right? Going on a vacation, buying a new car. They are a lot more expensive than they used to be. You used to be able to do that, a lot of these things on one salary. Today, you can barely do it on 2. When you go to a restaurant, why is it, for 2 people, it's minimum $150 now. Well, your currency, it's not that you're getting more food, your currency is just depreciating. It's devaluing over time. And so I've always found the exercise that's interesting, just to give you a frame of reference, is look at Vancouver real estate when it's priced in gold, right? Gold is money. Canadian dollar is just a fiat currency. It's just a paper. It's not backed by anything tangible. It's not real money. It's just a bronze. It's fiat. It's fake. Gold is real money. And so you look at Vancouver real estate, you price in gold and it hasn't gone anywhere. It's actually been declining for the last several decades. And so, I think that should just make people think. And so, well, hold on a minute. What is going on here? Is it the house flippers? We've got house flippers in the U.S. They don't have the same kind of house prices that we do today. I would argue, house flipping became famous on HGTV. They love it down there in the States. Plenty of house flipping down there. So really, what is it? I think it's politics. If we really unpack numbers further, right? I think, we've had 1 million people a year in recent years coming into this country. We've never completed more than 250,000 homes ever in this country. And you're having 1 million people a year. These are the real problems. Foreign capital flowing out from China in 2015, 2016 through their currency devaluation offshore. It ended up in global markets, not just in Vancouver, but Toronto, Seattle. You pick your market, it flowed there. And so that happened. And this is a global property market, right? And so it doesn't necessarily compete anymore on just local incomes. So you have all these issues that are actually creating higher house prices and unaffordability. It has nothing to do with house flipping. Okay, so house flipping, if you look at the Greater Vancouver stats, at its recent peak in February 2022, when house prices are going up like 20+% a year, house flipping, of the 3,000 plus sales we had, it was like 98. We had like 98 home flips that month within February. So if you look at it on a 2-year basis, so you say, okay, show me the number of homes that were bought and then resold within a 24-month time frame. Show me the 24 months, the percentage of sales that were flips. And that is currently running at 4%. It's 4% of sales. And you can see it gets to extreme, peaks in very, very, very frothy markets. The highest we ever saw was in 2007. Basically the peak of the subprime crisis when house values around the world were ripping. Yes, you definitely get some speculators coming in saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to cash in on my profits. And keep in mind that the percentage of people here, right? Today we're running at 4%. So it's 4% of total transactions. How many of those people though are divorce sales, job relocations, both of which are people that are going to be exempt under the new regulations. So the home flipping tax from the BC government exempts divorces, job relocations, and deaths. So we have to ask ourselves, of the 4%, how many are of that nature? I would probably say probably half. I would probably argue half. So you've got maybe 2% of the market that is actually home flipping. That's kind of the reality. And so, it's interesting that we're now demonizing. What I would tell you is the people that are when we think of home flipping, the general public thinks of some foreigner that goes in, buys a new property, and he buys it with the sole intention of flipping it and extracting money, not really doing anything to the property, just buy it, hold it for 12 months, flip it for a couple $100,000, and then walking off into the sunset. And that's nobody really does that. I've never had any clients who's we're gonna buy this and we're gonna hold it for 15 months and flip it for crazy profit. The people that are actually out there home flipping are it's a small segment of the market. It's usually it'll be tradespeople. For example, we got a client, electrician, works on his day-to-day job. He's an electrician, works hard, buys distressed properties, really bad, nothing that you and I would ever live in. I think the last property we helped him with, a drug user worked there. Literally, there was needles in the property. The walls were spray painted. The carpets and flooring were all ripped out. Disgusting. You can't live in this property. So he goes in there, deploys his capital that he's worked really, really hard for, rolls up his sleeves on the weekend, and rehabs the whole property on his own. He's an electrician by trade, but he learned how to lay floors, learn how to cut tile, ran around plumbing stores. So invested time, capital, energy, sweat, and then makes this a livable product, makes it look nice, and then flips it, 6-7 months later and makes some money. And people are that is a crime, that shouldn't be allowed. And I guess I would say that's maybe where I disagree with people. Call me a capitalist. I'm not a socialist. I think that people that deploy time, energy, and money into an uninhabitable property should reap the rewards of that. And that's what I believe. And I've personally rehabbed properties in the past. I've built rental housing. We help people buy and sell real estate all day. I can tell you, like, house flipping is such a small segment of the market that it's so insignificant in terms of affordability. It is not why people can't afford housing. It's because, the currency has been debased over the last several decades. People are being lied to. I would say that the true levels of inflation have been underreported for many, many, many years. And we've had government turning blind eye and creating policy that restricts new housing supply. You get 1 million people a year, and we've got restrictive zoning, government taxes and fees, for example, in the GTA are 30% of the cost of a new home. So if you tax housing like cigarettes, what do you get? You get less of it. And so that's really what we see. Now, what's interesting with this flipping tax, what I will say is, from a market perspective, from the ramification, it won't make housing more affordable. I will guarantee you that. We'll be talking about this, right? Similar to the way the foreign buyer tax, speculation tax, empty homes tax, luxury school property tax, none of that has made the housing market more affordable for the local person. And so, because we're getting away from the bigger picture, what is happening? Well, we've got this debasement that's ongoing and the inability to build enough housing to meet the supply. And the supply has sometimes been artificially inflated. And so the flipping tax, what it's actually going to do is, it's interesting. The way that the policy is written is, it says it's going to come into effect on January 1st of 2025. But it's a retroactive tax. So what that means is, if, let's just say you bought a pre-sale condo, you bought it 3 years ago, and it completes in March of 2025. Well, when it comes to completion in March of 2025, you are going to want to sell it. Maybe you don't want to live in it, right? Maybe you're an investor. You're like, you know what? I put my money on the line. It's been 4 years. It's time to see where the market is. Get out. You will be taxed 20% of the profits, if there is any profits. And I would say a lot of these pre-sales aren't going to have a lot of profits, if any. But you'll be taxed on those profits. So even though you bought it, 3.5 years ago, under what was the regime at the time, there was no tax. It's a retroactive tax. And to me, that doesn't sit well with me. Like, when you entered into this agreement, these are the rules of the day. And so you can't come out 3-4 years later and say, well, hey, when you bought it, you didn't know about this, but we brought it in and we got you. To me, that just doesn't sit well. And I don't really do pre-sales. I don't really work with pre-sale buyers, investors. Not really my jam. I'm not a huge pre-sale guy. But to me, it's just wrong. And so if I unpack that further, though, let's talk about the supply. So the BC government says we really want new supply. We've mandated all this new zoning policy. We've kind of removed zoning from municipalities. Great policy, by the way. I actually like that one. Good job for David Eby on that. But pre-sale buyers. Okay, so how development works in BC and GTA, and it's not going to change, despite you and I, we might want it to change, and we might want it to look different. Pre-sales predominantly sell to investors. The reason that they predominantly sell to investors is because it is a speculative asset. You're putting your money down today and you're getting a product 4 years from now or 3 years from now. See, it's highly unknown. What is the future? And most end users don't want to wait 3.5 years to move in. When people start looking to buy a home, they want to be able to look around, feel it, touch it, see it, and they want to move in 3 months from now. They're not going to wait 3.5 years. So end users can't absorb what investors can. Investors are happy to buy a piece of paper and say, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice. I might rent it out after. I might just sell it on completion, but I'm going to take the gamble because I'm not living in it. I'm going to rent it out and do whatever I need to do. So developers in BC have to pre-sell. They typically have to pre-sell about 60%. On average, they have to pre-sell 60% of a building. Sometimes, especially in this market, even more. So let's call it 65%. You don't get construction financing. to put a hole in the ground until you pre-sell 65% of the building. Okay? Are you going to be able to get enough end users to hit that 65% threshold to get the shovel in the ground and get the money from the bank? And I would say no. And so when you bring in now legislation that says, hey, listen, Mr. Pre-sale buyer, we want you to put your money on the line. And today we want you to pay, 10, 15% above the spot price, above the resale price today. We want you to pay more, tie up your money for 3.5 years. And by the way, if you go to sell it on when it completes in 4 years, you're going to pay 20% of your profits to the government. Not only that, but keep in mind, people are like, well, you should be taxed for flipping. You flip stocks, you get taxed. There already is capital gains. So the 20% tax is on top of the capital gains tax that's charged by the federal government. Right? It's 50% of your profit is taxed at your marginal tax rate. Now, if you've got a history of flipping, you've done this a couple times, it's taxed as active business income. It's not taxed as capital gains. It's taxed as active business income. So they take 100% of the profits. You make $100,000 on that flip. We'd say, okay, you made $100,000. You make $100K a year, and you made another $100,000 on your flip. You've got an annual income of $200K. You're going to pay tax on a $200,000 salary for this year. Tax at the highest top tax bracket. Okay, so you already pay. Like, people don't get it. Like, when you flip housing and you got a record of it, you pay a lot of taxes. That's why it doesn't really make sense to actually flip a lot of houses. Certainly not in Canada. So the BC government is saying, we're going to take an extra 20% on that. So again, as a pre-sale buyer, like, well, do you really want to play in that environment? I mean, that's a pretty hard ask. So like, I think this is going to hurt the pre-sale market even more, which ironically is then going to actually choke off supply, right? Think about this. We've been talking about in the show for months and months and months now that housing supply is getting crushed. And it's getting crushed predominantly because of the economic environment, rising interest rates. And then you bring in legislation like this, and you basically say, listen, like, investors, we think you're bad people. You're bad people. So you're going to pay another tax. Why would anyone invest in new housing? So the government, by bringing in like this policy measure, which is just political pandering for votes, is actually going to have more repercussions on the voter base that they say they're trying to help. And so it's the same thing, right? So people will say, well, why don't these investors just rent them out? When it, pre-sale, you buy it, you close it, you rent it out. Why don't they just rent it out for 2 years and then sell it? Well, let's look at the residential tenancy laws in this province. They are, I would say, I think from what I've seen and read and studied, I think BC has the most restrictive tenancy laws in British Columbia, in North America. In North America, it's basically impossible to get a tenant out. So not only do they cap your rents, they freeze your rent growth, right? Like they cap the rent growth below the rate of inflation. And then when you go to sell, you're like, hey, you can't be like, well, hey, I need you to leave because I want to sell and I want my unit to look good. No, you got to sell with the tenant in there. So if the tenant's makes it hard to show, or doesn't want to leave, or dirties it up, or bangs into the walls, it's pretty hard to sell. And if the tenant's below market, you're definitely not selling to another investor. So like, you've made the tenancy laws so bad that they favor one side so much, the tenants, that there's a reason why like these pre-sale buyers, they don't want to rent them out. So again, I just look at future supply. And again, I know that people are looking at this and say, yeah, well, I don't agree. I'm not in the housing market. So anyone that is potentially preventing me from entering the housing market, I want them gone. Totally get it. Fair enough. But let's call it for what it is. It's just political games. It's not going to change affordability. I would add one more thing onto that is renovating renovating old housing stock. So I can give you, another recent example is when a house is so bad, right? When a house is in such bad shape, you can't get financing. Okay, so the banks will say it's not an inhabitable condition, we won't lend on it. Or, if it's a detached house, we'll lend land value. We'll lend against the land, which is, like maybe your 65% loan to value, but we'll give no value to the house, to the structure, and it basically becomes almost like a land construction loan. And so these houses are almost like not financeable. So you need somebody that has the capital and the balance sheet to go in there, take the house, rehab it, fix it up, and then put it back on the market, where then a family can go and say, hey, listen, it's a fully renovated house. It's got a basement suite. What can I qualify for? The bank will happily lend against that product. But if you don't have the bad flippers in there to fix the old crappy house, who buys it? I'm telling you, like young families that are like borderline priced out of the market aren't coming in there and buying it because A, you can't get financing it, and B, even if you could, you need the money to rehab the house. You need cash. Banks don't lend you $300,000 for you to go do a home renovation. You got to do it with cash. So anyways, I just think that there's all these nuances in the local housing market here, particularly as it pertains onto the supply side. And so that's my lens. That's how I'm looking at it. Like I said, I have no issues personally with David Eby. He's been on the show. I like a lot of the policies that he's brought in. This 2-year home flipping tax, well, I think it sells very, very well politically. It's the easy scapegoat. I think it's an insanely ridiculous policy. And I'm saying this from the lens of my view of the day-to-day workings of the market. I just think that people, when they think of house flippers, they think of this foreigner that's coming in, buying a decent house and just sitting on it for 12 months with the intention of turning around and flipping it for a profit. And that is just not a thing. It's like the odd transaction once every 6 months that happens. Like, nobody goes in there. Yeah, you get some increased housing flipping activity at the tops of the market when house prices are going up 25% a year. Of course, it draws in a bit of speculation. That's just the nature of capitalist markets. To say though that that's what's causing the price growth is insane. House flipping is a symptom of incredibly loose monetary policy, euphoric bubbles. You get the house flipping activity, and then of course when right now, right, nobody's flipping houses. There's no money to be made, right? And so it's interesting. I'll give you one last story. Is I've had clients, for example, in the past, not that many, but I remember in 2022, I had a client that I think bought the property in 2020, and they bought young family, 2 kids, suburban family house, and they're living there. And this is a business owner, right? So he's a pretty smart guy, and he just looks at whatever is best for him and his family. And so he bought this house. He's living in it happily. And he sees the values going like this, just straight up through the pandemic, right? Loose money, cheap credit, everyone just going crazy. And I think his house went from I'm just giving round numbers here. It basically went from $1 million to $1.7 million in 18 months. And he calls me up. He's like, I want to sell. I'm like, you sure? You just moved in there. He's like, I got a chance to make $700,000 tax-free. I'm going to take it off the table. I'm going to go rent. This is crazy. You're giving me this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make $700,000 tax-free. I don't want to move. I don't want to move my family. I didn't create this market. But if this is out there and that's the ability, I will go rent. And he's still renting today. This is not a speculator. He didn't buy in 2020 saying, I'm going to go flip this house. He looked at it and says, this is stupid. The government let the housing market get out of control. They've printed all this money. They've inflated the asset prices, and I'm out. I think this is the financially prudent thing to do for me and my family. And so, is this a dirty speculator? Or is this just someone that says, listen, So like, and again, I look and say, well, is that making the housing market affordable, less affordable? I'd say, well, like, or you could have just stayed there and like, his house never would have been on the market, never would have been in a listing, and never would have added to the inventory pile. So like, net, does anything change? Food for thought. Would love to hear you guys' comments. Been rambling on here now for 25 plus minutes. But you guys have my thoughts on the home flipping tax. Again, if you're a pre-sale buyer and you got a housing completion coming up in 2025, that, hey, you know what? When you bought it, mortgage rates for 2%. Now they're 5.5%. Maybe you can't afford to carry the property anymore. Well, pay your 20% tax, pay your capital gains tax on top, and get out. As always, hope that helped. See you next week. If you're looking to buy or sell real estate in Vancouver, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to have a one-on-one consultation. Sometimes had people say they didn't reach out because they were nervous, or they thought I was too busy, or they thought I was just a talking head on YouTube. But in fact, I help people buy and sell real estate in Vancouver every single day. My team is in the top 1% of realtors in Greater Vancouver in terms of sales volumes. That's 14,000 plus realtors in the entire Greater Vancouver area. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. If you want to do that, there's a link in the description where you can book a 30-minute calendar consultation. We can have a conversation. I can walk you through how we work with our clients as a trusted advisor in some of the biggest decisions of your life. And so happy to have that conversation.